Hi, everyone, and welcome to our PCMH webinar series. We are having a fireside chat with some of our peer support facilitators from PCMH. Tonight, we have the topic of conversations with family and friends, given it is Family Day this month. So we thought it would be a really great time to have a conversation about how to kind of navigate those discussions. So with me tonight, we have Sue Peters from Oxford County, who has been with PCMH for over a year and a half and brings lived experience as a parent, navigating complex medical, mental health, and educational systems. And after finding strength through peer support while advocating for her daughter, Sue's now passionate about creating safe and supportive spaces where parents and caregivers in Oxford County feel empowered to advocate with confidence and know that they are the experts on their own children. Thanks for being here, Sue. And then we have Laura Young from Sudbury. And Laura is a mother of three and knows firsthand the challenges faced when navigating the child and youth mental health system. All three of her children struggle with various mental health challenges. And after 10 years of falling down rabbit holes into Wonderland, where nothing makes sense, having people who get it is often all that helps you turn the world right upside again, is Laura's philosophy. And that gives you the strength to continue to advocate for the care your loved one needs. Laura's dedicated to providing parents and caregivers in the Sudbury region with that safe space that they can find nowhere else so that they know they aren't alone and that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And we also have Roxanne Daigneault, who is in Kenora. And Roxanne is the parent of one child whom has struggled with mental illness for over 19 years and is now an independent adult successfully living on their own. Roxanne spent much of her time attending support groups, workshops, and courses related to mental health, and is now with us in our program, sharing much of what she's learned in her expertise in creating an environment of peer support, education, and empowerment through PCMH. She is passionate about ensuring that others can find a sense of belonging and experience and the same sense of community that she found when it mattered most. And my name is Vicki Cochran, and I'm the Family Partnerships Program Manager for Children's Mental Health Ontario. And I support our volunteer peer support facilitators in our program called Caregiver Connection, where we offer peer support across the province of Ontario. And I'm going to be guiding us through our conversation tonight. Thanks for joining me, everybody. It's great to see you all. I know that how to have conversations with friends and families is a topic that comes up in a lot of our peer support groups. So I'm really thankful to have you all here today to share some of your lived experiences in hopes that it helps parents and caregivers that are listening with how to navigate these conversations. So I want to start us off by asking you all to think about when you realized your child was struggling. What initially felt hardest to talk to others about? And Laura, I'll start with you.
I think the thing that felt hardest for me was that I questioned myself so much and felt so judged. So my daughter
Mm-hmm.
started to struggle when she was 7, and I didn't at that point know that kids could be mentally unwell. So when we
Right.
were struggling in public, people were looking at us, and I was thinking, what am I doing wrong? Why is this hard for us? And I just didn't know what I didn't know, but I really always felt like I questioned myself
Mm-hmm.
and couldn't figure out why it seemed so hard.
Yeah, I get that. I remember sitting in a church pew with a lady sitting behind me telling me that she couldn't give my son a mint because he hadn't been well behaved. And so it's
Uh-huh.
amazing the shame that you get, not just from looks, but also from strangers thinking that they can interject. So I hear you on that. Thanks for sharing, Laura. Roxanne, what about you? What was the hardest thing to talk to others about in your experience?
So I felt so alone when this first happened, right? Like, who else
Mhm.
goes through this? My
Yeah.
daughter was a teenager when she was first diagnosed. All those signs and symptoms were there from when she was a very young age. But I talked to very few people because honestly, I
Mhm.
knew that I would be judged. I'd already had friends and family give me well intended, loving advice that made me feel worse.
Mhm.
And if I'm going to be honest, I mean, I did judge people before I found myself in the middle of this storm and then
Yeah.
really realized I look at people differently.
I appreciate your vulnerability in that because I would agree. Before I became a parent, I judged all over the place. So
Right? Yeah.
I totally get it. And it's like you don't really understand until you live it. So I'm really glad you're here today to share that perspective as well. Especially that I love how you reflected back that your daughter may have been diagnosed in adolescence, but just like Laura said, there were probably signs when she was younger, but you didn't realize that she could be mentally ill at a young age. And I think that's a huge
Exactly.
piece to take away here today. Sue,
Yeah.
what about you?
What I found was the hardest part was anyone validating the struggles that I was going through. I also have an autoimmune and I was off work.
Hmm.
And so not only was I dealing with the struggles of having a child that was struggling mentally, I was also dealing with my own physical issues at the time. And I would have people tell me, well, at least you're not working so that you can deal with all of the things. And I felt like saying, well, I would really like to be working and I would really not like to be having to deal with all of the autoimmune issues that I was dealing with. And I didn't really feel like it was a bright side that
Right.
they were trying to offer me as that. So it just validating how hard it was. People
Yeah.
would also just say, well, that's parenting and it's hard. Well, okay,
Yeah.
but I just would like you to say that's hard.
Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate that, Sue. And I think about Brene Brown's video on empathy, right? And I think what we've all shared is an example of people trying to give advice or pointing something out as if you don't know, right? And that's where that shame lives. And then we carry that as parents. So I'm curious on that note, what motivated you to start sharing? Because I know I agree we're all saying we did not want to talk about it because we were shamed or we weren't validated and it feels really alone. But what motivated you to start talking about this? Roxanne, I'll go to you first.
I really started to share when I got more information and education to understand what was really happening with my daughter. But
Yeah.
honestly, I could only share what she gave me permission to share at that time, which made it very
Right.
difficult, right?
Hmm.
So I realized that people's judgments and really advice was coming from their lack of education. And for some, it was fear of the unknown, right?
Hmm.
For people to understand her, they needed information and education on how to best interact with her.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's like we can all acknowledge that many people, not everyone, but many people are giving well-intended, loving advice or trying to be helpful, right? But there are those who just don't believe in children having mental health challenges. And so that's an interesting point that we'll come back to, I think, Roxanne. Thanks for that. Laura, what about you? What motivated you?
Truthfully, I am not an internalizer. I am an open book. I talk as how I process.
Yeah,
And to not talk about something that was impacting my life so strongly was really not healthy for me. And I wasn't coping very well. So
yeah.
I started having to share first with safe people that I could ask questions to, but just for my own survival, basically. I can't not share things that are really big in my life. I'm fairly open
Yeah.
that way. And it just made it easier for all of us, I think, to process once I started being able to find those people I could talk to. And the more I talked, the easier it became.
I appreciate that perspective for sure. You mentioned something really important there that I'd like to dig into a little bit later, but you mentioned safe people and deciding who to talk to and who not to. And I think that's something that we'll dig deeper into. But first, Sue, I'm curious from your perspective, what got you started talking?
Well, part of it was some of the things that we were dealing with was ADHD and trying to get it diagnosed in a girl. And I have ADHD, so it was a little bit easier for me to talk about. And because I have always had to advocate for myself, so it was a little bit easier for me to advocate for her. But to repeat what Laura said, I needed to keep talking about it to keep coping because
Hmm.
I couldn't bottle it up anymore. I had to just let it out and it wasn't healthy to keep it. I was starting to get very angry towards a lot of things and it was bringing up memories for myself of things that I had been through. So I just needed
Yeah.
to keep talking about it.
So, what made it easier for you to talk with friends or family about it, Sue?
I think a little bit was I would be talking about myself and put it in the
Hmm.
first person and talk about the things that I knew about and I could relate to. So then I wasn't necessarily talking about her story. I was talking about my story. So then I was having adult conversations versus relating it to what she was going through.
Okay.
So then it made it easier. And I think other adults were able to talk about it because it was me not talking about
Right.
a child. Yeah.
Fair enough. So, you made it relatable in that way. I appreciate that. Laura, what about you? What made it easier for you as you found those safe people, but then how did it go from there?
Well, it was kind of an accidental discovery. I've written an annual Christmas letter for most of my adult life and would always sort of like our social media posts, it was usually the highlights of the year. And eventually we got to a point of it's not all grand. It's been really
Right.
tough. So in the annual letter, I would now put, and still do, because it's multiple members of our family, just sort of how we're doing and where we're at. And that could be general, it was a great year, it was not a great year, we're doing really well, we're not, what grade they're in. It just sort of made it easier for me to not have to
Yeah.
start all over again with everybody we met. And so this is family and friends. These are not acquaintances or strangers, but they
Right.
knew how we were doing, and it made it easier on the kids because it sort of decreased the number of interactions at family functions that maybe weren't going as well, because I wouldn't have to say she's really anxious or he's really struggling with his identity
Yeah.
or right, like whatever it was.
Yeah.
So it's broad strokes that I use, but it has made a huge difference. And I am told by multiple people, we really like getting your letter because it's not just the highlight reel, it's the, so that play wasn't so great and we need to learn from that, right? So not super specific,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah, and the kids probably appreciate some of that too, because you're right. You go to these family events and everybody's, what are you doing at school? And do you have a boyfriend or girlfriend? Or, the questions that we are so used to being asked, our kids are used to being asked, but sometimes aren't great things to be having to talk about or comfortable to be answering. So I love that you just took that pressure off of them that way. That's a great strategy. Roxanne, what about you? What made it easier for you to talk about things?
There was a time in my life when doing everything I needed to keep my daughter alive, right? And making sure that her needs could be met and that people she was going to come in contact with regularly knew how to talk to her and empathize with what she was struggling with. So, really, when her health became my priority over gossip, judgment, and unsolicited advice, I was able to then start talking openly and honestly.
So how did you decide who to tell and how much to share?
For many years, I kept her diagnosis and struggles to our immediate family to protect her.
Hmm.
It was when she became comfortable sharing that then I could be able to start sharing. And I felt important to share to as many people as I could because I learned so many lessons along the way. And really, when I
Hmm.
started to share, I really found some new friends because we often feel so alone, right, in all these struggles. So when I was sharing openly and honestly, people themselves who were going through those struggles wanted to sit and share with me. Like it was that connection that you make with people, right? That club
Yeah.
nobody wants to belong to.
The
Yeah,
club nobody wants to belong to, and yet we have an entire program for that club called Caregiver
right?
Connection. I love that. It's so true.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really valid point because I think actually that's where stigma lives is when we don't talk about it. The more we talk about it, the more we normalize these experiences. And there are so many families going through it that it is more normal than we think. Like, what is normal anyway, right? I know we talk about that a lot in our circles, right? And Sue, what about you? What's been your experience with deciding how much to say and who to tell?
Well, my family does have a lot of ADHD, so that was a little bit easier to discuss in my immediate family.
Yeah,
Lots of undiagnosed because I didn't diagnose it back in the 50s, so it was a little bit easier
right.
to talk about in my family. But going outside of my family, I also have some lived experiences, obviously, and I've learned about some things in school. So I didn't feel awkward talking about mental health. And I just felt like I always needed to be open about things to let people know what was going on, why we were doing things, why things were the way that we were, why we weren't going to places. I didn't want to have that stigma. And I felt the more that I just kept talking about it, then it just became normal. And I was also just a little bit angry a lot of times. So I really didn't care what other people thought. So I just said what I said because
Yeah,
that's what that was the season that we all were in our life. So
yeah,
I just have that personality.
that
Obvious.
helps.
We know I'm a little bit of an extrovert. So already having that extroverted confidence made it easier for
Yeah,
me to
yeah.
talk about things. And my mom also told me that one of her, not her biggest regret, and I don't want to put it as a regret, but one thing that she wishes, looking back, hindsight, was
Hmm.
being able to advocate for me more. When
Okay.
I was going through some struggles, I mean, it was
Yeah,
different. It was the 80s, it was the 90s. We didn't talk about things like that. So
yeah.
now I took her passion and her wishes to go and be able to pass that more.
I love that. So it inspired you really, and a
Yes.
little bit
Yeah.
along with just who you are, but
Yes.
also some inspiration helps. I know my dad was a huge support to me while I was raising my boys, who both are diagnosed with ADHD as well. And my dad struggled to parent when he was parenting my brother and I. And he would watch me parenting my boys with ADHD, and he had all kinds of questions, and they were always well intended, right? And lots of great advice. But he ended up in the end really coming around to seeing why I was doing things the way I was doing, and he learned a lot. But that took a lot of work on my end. And so it can be exhausting, right? So, Laura, how do you manage this? How do you decide who to tell and how much to share?
Sometimes it's a bit of trial and error. I mean, I do
Yeah,
have some people that are like my people. The other half of my brain is my best friend. There's no limit there. But in terms of people who are involved in helping me care for the kids,
right.
one relative gets really anxious and worries a lot if I tell her too much. One gets everything wrong if I tell her anything. She'll just broadcast it to the world
Hmm.
in inaccurate terms. And then I get phone calls and questions that have nothing to do with what's actually happening. I just sort of figured out that they need to know what they need to know to help me help them. So if there's a tech
Right.
rule, or they don't need to know all the appointments and all the prescriptions and all the nitty-gritty details, but they do need to know the broad strokes. And for most people, that seems to be enough in my life. And I have those select few that are my nitty-gritty. These are the specifics. Oh my gosh, I can't
Yeah.
believe this is what I'm dealing with today. Or people I can call, hey, I'm going to too many appointments. I can't cook right now for the family. Can you help me?
I think
By
acknowledging that that
those.
may change relationships
Mhm.
to an extent, right? Like I think we can all probably agree that the more you talk about it, sometimes the more it changes relationships and you realize who you can talk to and who you can't talk to in detail. I certainly know that happened in my world with friends. There were some friends that I realized what I might be sharing was horrifying to them because they had no
Mhm.
idea what I was going through. And so I learned to pull back a bit on how much I would share. And then there were the friends that I could just dump it all on, and I counted on that. So I hear you on being selective. And I love what you said about, I'm not going to quote you directly, but I think they needed to know what they needed to know to help you. And that was it. That was all they needed. So I love that kind of a balance. And speaking of balance, I think we've all kind of alluded to this a little bit, but Laura, can you share a little bit more about how you balanced your child's privacy with your need for support on that note?
That's actually really hard, and it's come with a lot of asking. So initially,
Hmm.
when I was just sharing about my daughter, she's also like her mother and very open. She tells everybody just about everything, sometimes a little more than she probably needs to. So she's always been really okay with me sharing.
Yeah.
And generally, I don't use her name, or I'm also a teacher in my professional life, and I teach a lot of kids around that age, and the parallels are quite common. So she's always been really open. My middle child, my eldest son, is a little less so. He might have been slightly embarrassed at a board chess tournament that everybody knew what happens when you call 911 9 times, because I'd used
Oh
that
my
story
goodness.
as a teaching moment. And he
Yeah,
did understand why I had used it. So I have learned it really does depend on which of my kids and what I'm sharing. Very
that's
generally,
fair.
when I tell them why I want to share things or why I feel the need to advocate for things to be better, and to do that, I need to have specific examples. They're usually okay with it, but I perhaps needed to ask my eldest son a touch sooner, but that was just too good a teaching moment not to use, and it gets used a lot.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. It's those ongoing conversations too, because as they get a bit older, their preferences might actually change. So it's not really like a one-time conversation, is it? It's sort of like, I'm
No.
about to go and do this event, or I want to use this story as an example. It's almost by situation and not just a flat, yes, like you can talk about me.
I've been doing it for 10 years, and their ages have
Yeah,
changed drastically in those 10 years. So what was okay at
exactly.
8 is no longer at 14 or 15. So
Absolutely.
They
Yeah.
they might have even been asked about this. And the 911 story is like a moot point at this point because everybody knows it. But so I didn't ask about this one.
Well, now
But
anybody
the
listening across Ontario knows it. So
don't call 911 9 times. The police will show up at your house.
that's right. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Yes, definitely not a recommendation in our top tips for today's webinar. So thanks, Laura. Roxanne, what about you? How did you balance that privacy? I know your daughter was an adolescent already when you really started diving into mental health discussions. So how did you manage that?
My husband and I, over time, became each other's support. And
Hmm.
so having each other to share what we were going through really helped. My parents were also, my mom was there for me, and my dad had already passed. So my mom's was really that person that I confided in. But I ended up
Hmm.
commuting because my daughter ended up going to post secondary school 2,000 kilometers away, and where she was diagnosed with a major disorder and illness. And so when I left my friends and my family, I was in a place where I knew nobody. So honestly, I started going to support groups, and
Yeah.
they became my biggest support. They were my next family, right? People who really understood what I was going through. They were people who could just listen and support the way I needed to be supported. Yeah.
So just not unlike what we're offering in the Caregiver Connection program is that space to just be able to talk in a non-judgmental way and ask questions or vent in a way that you might not be able to vent with just anybody. So I can appreciate that the support
Yeah.
groups are what got you through.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks, Roxanne. Sue, what about you? How did you
Um,
balance that? Or how do you?
well,
Because we're still balancing it, right? And
because
I'm talking like past tense, but we're all still balancing this.
we're still here. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, because there was also some medical trauma, it was easier to talk about the physical parts of the medical
Right.
and not so much as the side effects of the psychological.
Hmm.
So I kept everything quiet for her for a bit, and I just used how I was feeling because it was her story, and people aren't as awkward when you're talking about physical things. So,
Right. Yeah.
so I focused on the medical side of it when I would talk to people, and then I would say, well, now I'm feeling, and I would always use I statements, and I don't know if that was good or bad, but it just helped me get through being able to share. I did run into some incidences where I was sharing too much
Hmm.
for her, and it really caused an issue with our relationship because then she got into adolescence and then I was no longer allowed to share any information. For me, I just made sure I talked about how I was feeling. And I
Yeah.
made it, and I don't want to say that I made it about me because it definitely wasn't about me. But when talking about things by talking about like how I was feeling or how I was very busy or I had an
Hmm.
appointment. I would keep everything sort of broad. But like
Yeah.
everybody else said, I definitely had my safe people that I could talk to, and we know who those were. So that's pretty much how I made sure to do things. And now
Fair.
being in PCMH and going through, I talked to her about what I could share in group.
Hmm. Hmm.
Obviously, I let all of our people talk, but I asked her, can I go? What can I share? What am I allowed to talk about? And she gave me specific rules of things that I'm allowed to talk about. And she still has the same rules. You can talk about the medical stuff. Don't talk a lot about the other stuff.
Yeah, that's fair because it is her story, right? I appreciate what all of you've shared because it is a balance between sharing our experience. And Sue, I think your strategy of talking about your experience is absolutely fair. We are still experiencing this in our own way. And so we can share what we choose to share, and we want to give our kids that same benefit of us sharing what they're okay with us sharing where it makes sense, right? So I absolutely appreciate that. Roxanne, I'm curious how you would start these conversations with family and friends, and maybe if you have any tips on what language has been most helpful, or for example, words or phrases or approaches you've learned to avoid. The good, the bad, and the ugly. That's what I want to hear next.
Oh, so depending on the people I'm talking to, my daughter has a line that can put people at ease. I say she lives with bipolar, OCD, ADHD, anxiety. And as she says, you buy one and you get three free.
I
And
love that
usually,
humor. Yeah.
right? And usually when you can start that conversation with lighthearted, it makes people more comfortable. And then
Hmm.
they're more likely to ask questions. And as a parent, educating people on mental illness is so important.
Absolutely. We're sort of called to whether we like to or not, right? Because that's partly how we're advocating for our kids too out there, is
Right.
educating folks coming into contact with them. So I appreciate the use of humor. Okay, that's a good tip. Thanks, Roxanne.
Yes.
Sue, what about you?
ADHD is a trigger word right now. People are on the fence and there's lots of opinions on it and that sort of thing. So instead of actually talking about the diagnosis or any other diagnosis that
Hmm.
my daughter has, I talk about the symptoms. So I don't use the words.
Okay.
By not saying the diagnosis, now I'm not afraid of her diagnosis. We're not ashamed of any diagnosis that she has. It lessens the conversations and people, it's funny if you don't say ADHD, but you say, I have a problem with executive functioning, figuring things
Right.
out or remembering to do things or getting distracted easily, then people will listen to the conversation. But if you say, oh, I have ADHD, oh, well, of course you do. Everybody does.
It leaves room for judgment and
Right.
assumptions. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. That's
So
a great strategy.
I just don't say the diagnosis or the label. And again, I
Yeah.
want to emphasize I am not ashamed of the label
Yeah.
or the emphasis or anything like that. It just makes it easier to talk. And like Roxanne said, anything that you say with humor makes everything easier. And I also just have this natural habit to say things with a smile. And it's
Yeah.
like if you give bad news with a smile, it still sounds great. So it's okay.
Those are great strategies. I know I keep hearing humor, the use of language matters. So, I like that you're making it more tangible so people actually understand what the experience is rather than just giving like a label that everybody has assumptions about. Because you're right, ADHD is that phrase where everybody says, I feel ADHD today. And that is a real thing for a lot of people. Like, then there's like real tangible things that go along with that. So, thanks for sharing that, Sue. Laura, what about in your experience? Is there any phrases you try to stay away from or that you use that are easier to navigate these conversations?
The one I use most often is actually just complex mental illness because it's
Mm,
an alphabet soup of diagnoses in our house.
right.
And if I say complex mental illness, that implies a few things. One, it's not a phase. This is not, we're not going through a hard time. Illness is illness. And
Yeah.
complex because they are multifaceted. And we see a team of people to get us to where we are, right? There's
Yeah.
so many things involved and so many moving parts that seems to make it a little less overwhelming for people to hear, but also gives them the idea that we're not talking about like, it's not a broken toe. This is a long-term thing. We're not going to outgrow this. It's not going to go away. If
Yeah.
that goes well, we can get a little bit more in depth, but generally that's been my easiest one to use. And I'm not even sure how I started there. I think it's because my kids were so small when we started to struggle. And that
Yeah.
just was the easiest way to let people know in a hurry that there's a lot we're dealing with and there's a lot on the go
Yeah.
and there's lots for them and all those
Yeah.
sorts of things.
You're right. The word complex says a lot just in and of itself, right? And might even help stop assumptions, meaning there's a lot here to talk about. And if you're willing to listen, we can talk more about it. But not everybody wants to know the nitty-gritty because it's a lot to take in too. So I can appreciate that. And your compassion toward others, all of you, talking about how others are experiencing you talking about it, which is so interesting, right? That we worry about that too. And we're thinking about how do we bring this message to others to educate, to build compassion, and we want the same in return. So, Sue, I'm curious how you've handled unhelpful reactions or unsolicited advice, like the lady that wasn't going to give my son a mint, in church. Like, how do you handle those misunderstandings?
Well, when I do get advice and people tell me about how they've parented their child or they've had similar lived experiences, although I do want to say similar is a very broad term because I don't think anybody has had the same experience ever, even if you have the same diagnosis. We're dealing with PTSD, ADHD, and GAD, so general anxiety disorder. So what I say to people is, what works for one child may not work for another. So I'm happy that something that works for your child, I'm going to work on what works for my child. And that sort of shuts down anything really fast because there's really no spot for conversation. And then I just walk away.
I think that's a great phrase to use. It validates what they're saying, that it works for you. That's fantastic, but also acknowledges that might not work for you. And I think that's a kind way to also handle that. So that's a great suggestion. Laura, what about you? I know humor is your friend, but what else do you
Yes.
have to suggest to folks today?
It depends on the context. If it's when I'm already feeling emotionally dysregulated, we're dealing with a lot. Generally, in that moment, I do very little. I just, especially if it's someone I don't know, right? Like if it's a member of the general public or somebody on a flight or whatever, very seldom will I respond in that moment.
Right.
But I will often think about it later and be like, what could I have done or said? Often it's usually with some friends and we come up with really helpful t-shirt slogans that would have just diffused that at the time. Like, what doesn't help right now? Comments from the peanut gallery, or, this is our best. This is literally as good as it's going to look today. Because I really do think the judgment can be triggering for me sometimes because I don't understand why people feel the need to tell you these things when you have not asked for
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
So I, in the moment, sometimes know I can't probably trust myself to not snarl because I am feeling like, what gives you the right to comment right now on how we're handling things? This is generally in public. If it's more with relatives or friends, that's a bit different, but
Yeah.
usually with humor. And I will call friends and be like, hey, so next time I need a really good snappy comeback, and I would probably never remember to use it, but the laughing about it later makes it feel less irritating, and I don't get it so stuck in overthinking it and
Yeah,
all those things.
absolutely. And the humor, and I love the t-shirt concept, because if only we could wear t-shirts, it might help the public understand more if they haven't lived it, and what it might actually be like, because I know those moments are very real when we're in public and our kids are struggling. And I think that as parents with kids who struggle, however that looks, there's a lot of judgment out there, and I don't think people realize how harmful it is for us in that moment to remain calm when we're feeling judged and shame and embarrassment, and all we're trying to do is support our kid in a moment that they're having a really hard time. So I appreciate that you can hold it down in the moment and then laugh about it later as a way to cope.
T-shirt idea might have something relevant, because if we are with like my niece or nephew who are very visibly challenged in a wheelchair and with oxygen, people hold doors for us, and it's not shame, blame, and stigma. Whereas if my kid's melting down and doesn't have any visible ways of identifying that they're struggling, it's the blame, shame, and stigma.
I think that's actually fair to say. And I think that we've all felt those icicle stares or those burning stares. It's like they just burn right through you to your core. And if there's anything that I would hope the general public could understand more of, is that kids struggling is something that is often out of parents' control and is not just a bad parenting. And we all know that in our groups and in our circles and our communities that we've created within Caregiver Connection. So I appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that, Laura, because it's very real for lots of us, I think. So Roxanne, come to you lastly. What about your experience here with unsolicited advice?
So, you know what, again, coming back to what I first said about myself and looking back how I possibly judged when I wasn't in it. So my first thought always is, when I hear unhelpful, unsolicited, misunderstanding from people, is that they're doing so with a lack of knowledge and education to understand my situation, right? I usually just thank them, and then I'll give them some education on what I'm dealing with. If I feel it's coming from a hurtful place or a place to want to blame me and make me feel bad, I'll just thank them and leave it at that. It took me a long time to get over the guilt and the self-blame that I felt from hurtful words, right? So working with peer supporters and working with my peer groups, I grew more confident and secure in understanding where that was coming from. Again, how much that peer support helped me.
Yeah, absolutely. Because once you find your people, that really matters, right? And that can help you stand a little more confidently and secure in knowing you really aren't the only one getting those stares and having to have these conversations. I'm going to do a bit of a power round here. This is like a quick answer question. What do you wish you had known before having these conversations? Sue, go.
I wish that I knew that I had the power to say no.
Okay.
I wish that I knew that I could have the power to say no of people that have significantly more education than I do and have letters in front of their name and letters behind their name, that I could say no because I am the expert of my child. And I mean, I'm her biological mother, so she is half of me, and I know what I'm like, but I know what her dad's like. So I can say no because I know we're the best.
Thank you, Sue. Laura.
I would say something very similar. I wish I had learned to trust my instincts more quickly, and to be able to say, you've seen her for 20 minutes, we live this 24/7. We are not seeing things the same way. And I was too afraid to say that perhaps I didn't feel things were the right fit, because I didn't want to be labeled the difficult parent or be denied services when there aren't enough of them anyway. And I just wish I'd learned to trust myself sooner. 2016 Laura would not recognize me because I say no a lot now.
Yeah, and actually many of us become that parent because it takes being that parent to help our kids and support them. So I appreciate that. Being comfortable with being that parent actually, and realizing that parent's actually a really strong advocate and really knows their kid. And I really hope that we can redefine that today. So thank you. Roxanne, what about you? What do you wish you had known?
I wish that I would have had my voice back then. I wish that I would have been able to speak up and speak out for her and advocate better. That took me a long time to find that confidence in my voice in doing that. So that was something that took me a long time to do for her.
I love that. Thank you. So I'm hoping we can share a moment now where you realized that talking openly led to unexpected support or understanding. And Sue, I'm going to come to you first for this one.
So this is my story about how I even came to PCMH. So it was 2021. We were still COVID lockdowns. Parents can't go into school, and my daughter was refusing to go into school. And I think it was a cold winter, and it was minus double digits of some kind. And she was standing outside. She did come in the car every once in a while. I just want everybody to know she was safe. But she was refusing to go into the school. And I put on Facebook because it had been 2.5 hours of trying to go through this. The school had said, we won't help you unless she's in the building, even though she was on school property. But I made a Facebook post, and I'm pretty sure I just vented about everything, that I left my coffee at home. It's minus double digits. I'm sitting out here. The weather, like everything was a giant vent session. And later that evening, after everything calmed down and we got home, I got a message from one of my friends, one of my dear friends that I've known for a very long time, said, hey, I have this group chat. Do you want to come and join this group chat? And I was like, oh my gosh, a group chat. We all know group chats and who wants to be in another group chat. But it was actually a group chat of parents that have children with complex needs. And so they call themselves the Mama Llamas, and I have permission to talk about them. So
The Mama Llamas,
the
I
Mama
love
Llamas, they said, hey, do you want to come into our group? And they brought me in, and basically that was my peer support during COVID and at the height of all of my struggles and all of our struggles. And they gave me the confidence. They were the ones that helped me find my voice. They were the ones that, yes, we also did have some group chat things. We shared different memes and all that stuff, but it was them that gave me the confidence to then start sharing and then start talking about things and then really start advocating. But if it wasn't for their support, I don't think I would be where I am now, being able to advocate as much and then be here with PCMH, because she was actually one that brought me to a meeting.
Bring a friend day. I love that, Sue. And your Mama Llamas, I love that name. I also have a group that I call the Mamas, and my boys knew them like aunts, like they're like family, because they are literally the folks who I could trust, could care for my kids despite the difficulties, and would love them just as much as they needed to be loved, I guess is the best way to say it, right? And accepted them for who they are.
And they made sure I wasn't alone. It was just really,
exactly.
I was alone, and then I wasn't alone when I had them.
So find your people, whether that's at peer support or in your community, and the use of Facebook too. Thanks, Sue. Roxanne, what about you? I know you shared earlier that you had traveled 2,000 kilometers into a community you didn't know. And so how did you find peer support there?
A lot of Google searches, and
Yep.
I had come across it was called the BC Schizophrenic Society, which was a big umbrella for all mental illnesses, and they introduced me to support groups. And it was through there that I realized that somebody had just thrown me a lifeline. I was going to make it through today. I could make it through tomorrow. And it was so great. But what happened with that was when I came back to our community, I thought, great, going to find my people, my community, my supports. This is going to be fun. Nothing. I couldn't find anything facilitated. I couldn't find anything organized. And I thought, I am not the only person that's going through this.
Yeah.
So in doing that, I approached our hospital with a peer support proposal. And it was through that they brought me on Firefly, which is our lead agency, Lake of the Woods District Hospital, as well as CMHA Fort Francis, came together, partnered together, and brought me on as supports for people in our community. And it was through Firefly that I got introduced to PCMH. And that's when it all clicked, right? With all of the supports that you have and how you support us and the education that we get. Yeah.
Amazing. I appreciate that. And we're so lucky to have you in our network of peer supporters. So I'm so glad you did that. That was huge initiative. And often many of our volunteers are folks that have reached out saying, I really need this in my community. How do I get it started? Right. So thanks for setting that up, Roxanne.
Yes. Thank you, guys.
And Laura, what about you? Can you share a moment about how you talking openly led to an unexpected amount of support or understanding that you weren't expecting?
Anytime I PCMH. in a non-meeting way. So often I will, at family functions or in the staff room at work, people will be talking and making judgments, and I will jump in. And it's really validating when you start to hear that come back. So earlier this week, same group of people, somebody made a comment that was perhaps a little bit more judgmental, and I was about to step into PCMH and somebody else did it for me, and I went, oh, all this PCMHing has, and it sounds silly because it's not always about me. I feel like if all this talking about it can help people be more open and understanding to everybody else, it's a really big accomplishment. And I actually went to that person later and said, oh my goodness, you PCMH'd for me. Thank you so much. Because it does start to feel like perhaps it shouldn't just be you that understands that there's other people that are going through this and can validate other people. And it was this really massive moment.
That is an amazing moment, Laura. Like, honestly,
it's huge.
That's the fact that it spread and you witnessed it being like actually happening, and the fact that you've turned PCMH into a verb. So you have turned PCMH into a PCMHing. It is an action word. And I think that we are a group of action-oriented people. So I love that you also highlighted that. And Laura, if we keep building on that, what message would you want family and friends to hear most about supporting children and youth with mental health challenges?
Everyone's doing their best. This is their best, right? We are all doing the best we can with what we have. And if that means the kid isn't going into school for 2.5 hours, that's their best in that moment. That's your best in that moment. And we just need to recognize that everybody's doing their best with what they have. And that can look different from day to day.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a really helpful conversation, I think, in terms of just helping folks think about ways to approach these conversations, because sometimes they aren't easy, and just building that confidence in being able to talk with friends and family, especially, let alone strangers. But when we're talking about the people that are in our orbit, friends and family, deciding who to talk to, what to share, how to respect your child or youth's boundaries. I think we've covered a lot of really great stuff tonight. I am just hoping that folks will go to our website. On the website, you can also check out our caregiver connection groups that are located across the province. And we invite you to join any of them that are virtual or hybrid if you don't have one in your own community. But if you do want one in your community and you feel inclined to start it, get in touch with us by emailing us at support@pcmh.ca. Thanks everyone for listening today. Have a great day.